Hello there, and welcome to Forgotten Worlds. My name is Thomas, and tonight I invite you to let your thoughts soften, your breathing slow, and your imagination open to a question as old as humanity itself. We speak every day. Words flow from us so easily that we rarely stop to wonder where they came from. Sentences rise and fall like tides, carrying our memories, our hopes, our arguments, and our dreams. And yet, for all its familiarity, language remains one of the deepest puzzles science has ever faced. No one can say with certainty when it began, or how. Some researchers point to a great leap of symbolic thought around 70,000 years ago, when early humans began not only to make tools, but to tell stories, to sing, to carry ideas across generations. Others believe the roots stretch back much further, tangled in the long evolution of gesture and sound. But wherever the starting line may lie, one truth remains. Nothing else in the natural world comes close to the complexity of human speech. And that raises a quiet, unsettling possibility. Was this gift of words, this strange power to turn thought into sound, something we stumbled into by chance? Or could it have been placed within us, given by another hand, perhaps by a species older and wiser, leaving behind a legacy whispered not in stone or bone, but in syllables? Tonight we won't rush toward conclusions. This isn't a debate but an exploration, a slow drift into myths, science and speculation. Together, we'll trace the mystery of language, its sudden appearance, its universality, and its unexplainable power, and we'll ask what it might mean if the words you're hearing right now are not entirely our own. To begin, let's start with the puzzle at the very heart of it all, the origins of language itself. When scientists try to trace the beginning of language, they find themselves staring into a mist. Unlike bones or tools, words do not fossilize. They leave no direct imprint in stone, no skeletons for us to measure, no timelines we can date with certainty. What survives instead are echoes, marks of symbolic thought in art, fragments of ancient skulls that suggest changes in the brain or the throat, and stories passed down so long that no one remembers their beginning. And so the origin of language remains one of the most profound puzzles in all of human science. We know it must have happened. After all, you and I are speaking across time right now, carried by words that feel effortless. But when did the first spark appear? Was there a moment when silence broke into sound, when gesture was suddenly not enough, when a group of humans looked at each other and found themselves capable of sharing thoughts with precision? Or was it slower, a long unfolding, each generation adding a layer until the invisible scaffolding of grammar and meaning was built high enough to carry us? The record is tantalizing but uncertain. Archaeologists often point to a turning point roughly 70,000 years ago, a time sometimes called the Great Leap Forward. It is here that symbolic behavior begins to show itself clearly in the archaeological record. Caves in South Africa, etched with patterns that may have carried meaning. Strings of beads fashioned from shells, their holes carefully drilled. Red ochre smeared across stone and skin in what looks very much like ritual. These were not just tools for survival, they were signs of minds reaching beyond the immediate. And perhaps, of tongues carrying stories we will never hear. Yet this leap is not an agreed-upon truth. Some scholars argue that the foundations of language must have been far older, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years into the long shadows of Homo erectus, or even further. After all, the human vocal tract, with its unique shape, was not built in a single night. It had to evolve gradually, piece by piece. Why would evolution craft such an instrument so finely tuned to produce the vast range of sounds we use if our ancestors had no words to shape? But here lies the tension. Language leaves so few traces that every claim floats somewhere between evidence and interpretation. Some insist that language is at least 2 million years old, born with the first flickers of complex social life among early hominins. Others see it as astonishingly young, appearing almost suddenly alongside art, myth, and memory less than 100 millennia ago. Both views are possible, and both leave us wondering why the world has so little to say about this most human of inventions. Think about that for a moment. You can walk into a cave and see the bones of a creature that died 300,000 years ago. You can hold in your hands a stone tool chipped by someone whose name will never be known. But no one can hand you the first word ever spoken. No one can tell you what it was, or who said it, or why. Did it name an animal? Did it call for food? Did it whisper love, or grief, or fear? Whatever it was, it disappeared the moment it was uttered, as all spoken words do, vanishing into air. And yet, its consequences were anything but fleeting. The arrival of language, whenever it came, transformed the human mind. It allowed memory to expand, knowledge to spread, and imagination to leap beyond the limits of one lifetime. With words, experiences no longer died with the individual. They could be carried forward, taught to children, shared across groups, even altered and woven into myth. Without language, there could be no culture as we know it, no history, no collective identity. But this only deepens the mystery. If language is so essential to who we are, why is its beginning so hard to trace? Why do we stand on such uncertain ground when it comes to our most defining trait? Some researchers have even called this the hardest problem in science, harder than the origins of life itself, because life at least leaves fossils. Words leave only silence. This silence has given rise to theories, some careful, others more daring. Perhaps, some say, language was not one thing but many. Gestures first, then cries, then chants, slowly braided together until meaning could travel more swiftly. Or perhaps it was indeed a revolution, a sudden rewiring of the brain that unlocked syntax and symbolism all at once. But then the question becomes, why then, and why us? This is where imagination begins to creep in, because the puzzle of language is not only about history, it is about possibility. If our ancestors truly crossed a threshold 70,000 years ago, why did it happen in that particular moment? Was it chance? A mutation of the brain? An environmental pressure that demanded cooperation on a new scale? Or was it, as some myths suggest, a gift? Something seeded, taught, or placed within us when the time was right? When you lie in bed tonight, listening to these words, imagine the strangeness of that possibility. Somewhere in the distant past, before stone temples and written records, before the first villages and the first fireside songs, humans may have received language the way a spark receives tinder, not gradually, but suddenly igniting a flame that has never gone out. And what a fire it has been. From those first whispers to the thousands of languages spoken across the world today, words have shaped everything. They carry our laws, our prayers, our songs, our arguments, our lullabies. They shape our consciousness itself. To ask where language came from is to ask where we came from, not only as animals, but as thinking beings. This is why its origin remains such an aching mystery, because in seeking the first word, we are really seeking the first moment when thought became shareable, when the solitude of the mind cracked open into community. And in that search, we find only shadows, fragments, and unanswered questions. Perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps language began not in clarity, but in mystery. And that brings us to the next part of our journey, the uniqueness of human speech. For if the puzzle of origins is clouded in uncertainty, the contrast it creates is clear. Out of all the creatures on earth, only we speak as we do. Why is that? And what made us so different? Part 1b. The uniqueness of human speech. When you listen to the chorus of life around you, birds calling in the early morning, dolphins clicking beneath the waves, wolves howling across valleys, you hear communication. Every species has its way of sharing signals, from the dance of bees to the songs of whales. Yet none of them come close to the layered, infinite complexity of human speech. We are not simply making sounds, we are building worlds. Each sentence can describe things that don't exist, could exist, or once existed. Each phrase can weave time and possibility into a single breath. No animal, however intricate its calls, has yet been shown to cross this threshold. That difference is subtle in sound, but staggering in meaning. Consider the vocal tract itself. In humans, the larynx, the voice box, sits lower in the throat than in most other primates. This anatomical change reshaped the possibilities of sound, allowing us to produce the vast array of vowels and consonants that make up the tapestry of language. It came at a cost. A lowered larynx increases the risk of choking, a trade-off that evolution rarely entertains lightly. For nature to permit such a risk, the reward must have been immense, and in our case, it was the birth of articulate speech. Even the curve of your tongue, the flexibility of your lips, the shape of your palate, all of these small adaptations conspired to create a system capable of producing thousands of distinct sounds. Combined and recombined, they give rise to the 7 languages spoken on Earth today. Each one is a living experiment in what the human vocal tract can do, stretching across dialects, tones, and rhythms. And yet, biology is only half the story. For the ability to make sound is not enough, you must also know what to do with it. This is where the brain enters, and where one small piece of genetic code seems to hold enormous sway. In the early 2000s, scientists identified a gene known as FOXP2, sometimes called the language gene. Its discovery came from studying a family in Britain with a striking inheritance: a difficulty in forming complex sentences passed down across generations. The problem wasn't intelligence; they could think as clearly as anyone, but something about the mechanics of speech and grammar faltered. When researchers traced the issue, they found mutations in this single gene. FOXP2 influences the development of neural circuits involved in speech and motor control. In other words, it helps build the brain pathways that allow us to coordinate thought, tongue, and sound into coherent language. What makes this gene fascinating is that humans share almost all of it with chimpanzees, our closest relatives. The difference lies in just 2 amino acids, tiny molecular changes, but ones that seem to carry enormous consequences. It's a reminder of how narrow the gap can be between silence and speech. Just a couple of shifts in our DNA, and suddenly the brain and vocal system align to create language. For most species, communication remains bound to the immediate danger: calls, mating, cries, signals of food or territory. For us, it became boundless. We can speak of stars billions of light years away, or of memories that never happened, or of dreams that may never come true. That is the strange power of these tiny genetic changes, the ability to make imagination audible. But here, the question presses deeper. Why us, and why then? Why should one species leap so far beyond the others, when evolution usually works in increments, not revolutions? The lowered larynx, the finely tuned tongue, the altered gene, all arriving together, interlocking and transforming. Was this an extraordinary accident, a convergence of traits that just happened to produce speech? Or could it have been something else, something guided, perhaps even engineered? Speculation here enters the space of myth and possibility. Some have wondered whether language was not merely an evolutionary step, but an intervention. If an older intelligence, perhaps terrestrial or beyond, sought to leave its mark on Earth, what more powerful way than by altering our ability to communicate? A gift of speech would not only shape our survival, it would shape our consciousness, our memory, our ability to build civilizations. It would be the ultimate upgrade, invisible yet profound. And if you let your thoughts drift further, another image emerges. Imagine early humans wandering across a harsh Pleistocene landscape, armed with tools of stone and fire. They gesture, they grunt, they share meaning as best they can. Then something changes. Perhaps a mutation ripples through a small community. Perhaps an encounter occurs, some meeting we cannot now record. And suddenly words begin to fall into place. Ideas take shape in sound. Myths and plans, warnings and promises all find a new vessel. A threshold is crossed, and those who step beyond it carry an advantage so great that their descendants will one day reshape the entire planet. It is a haunting thought that the thing which defines us most might not be ours alone. But even without speculation, the uniqueness of human speech is clear. Our nearest relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, share 99% of our DNA. They laugh, gesture, and even learn to use signs with human trainers. And yet, they never construct the elaborate syntax that allows us to say, "If tomorrow it rains, then the harvest will be lost, and we must find another way." That conditional thought, that nesting of ideas, seems beyond their grasp. Dolphins sing in patterned clicks, birds mimic the sounds of engines and phones, whales pass songs through generations. These are astonishing feats, but they remain bounded. They do not spiral outward into poetry, philosophy, or science. The gulf between human and animal communication is not just a matter of degree, it is a matter of kind, and that is what makes it so mysterious. Why should language exist in such fullness only once in all of Earth's history? Why not twice, or thrice, in parallel lineages? If it were simply advantageous, surely other species would have developed it in some form. Yet here we are alone, speaking to ourselves and to the stars, surrounded by creatures that communicate richly but never symbolically. Perhaps this is the truest uniqueness of human speech, that it carries the infinite within the finite. With a small set of sounds, we can build an endless number of meanings. With a handful of rules, we can create entire worlds of thought. It is as though the universe placed within us a code, simple in its building blocks, infinite in its reach. And so, as you listen to these words, consider the possibility that language is more than a tool. It is a threshold, a dividing line between what was and what could be. Whether it came by chance, by evolution's patient hand, or by something older and hidden, it remains the great divider. From here, our path will carry us into myth. For long before scientists traced genes or mapped vocal tracts, human beings were already telling stories about where their words came from. Stories of gods, of messengers, of beings who arrived not to conquer but to teach. Legends in which speech itself was a gift, bestowed rather than invented. And that is where we must go next, into the myths of language as a gift, where history blurs into memory, and memory blurs into something stranger still. Across the world, in the deep wells of myth, the story of language does not begin with chance. It begins with bestowal. Human beings did not stumble into words. These tales say they were given them, handed down like a sacred inheritance. If science hesitates at the silence of prehistory, myth fills it with voices, and those voices almost always belong to gods. Take, for instance, the story of the Tower of Babel, told in the Hebrew Bible. In this tale, humanity once shared a single language, a perfect medium of unity. With one tongue, they built together, worked together, dreamed together, and even began to reach upward, crafting a tower meant to touch the heavens. But such ambition unsettled the divine. The story tells us that God scattered their speech, multiplying tongues until neighbors could no longer understand each other. The tower crumbled, and humanity's voices became fragmented, countless, and divided. It is a myth with a peculiar echo. Not only does it explain the diversity of languages, but it implies that our original condition was unity, that words were not invented piece by piece, but granted whole. And then, for reasons beyond human control, they were taken apart. Whether you read the tale as literal, symbolic, or somewhere in between, the image lingers. Language was not ours to begin with. It was borrowed, it was broken, and ever since we have lived in the shards. Far from Babel's desert sands, in the temples of ancient Egypt, another figure emerges. His name was Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and speech. To the Egyptians, he was not merely a deity of scribes, he was the very architect of communication itself. They believed that it was Thoth who invented writing, who gave words to humanity, who measured time, and who kept the universe in balance through his mastery of language and knowledge. To write was to invoke Thoth's gift, to share in a divine order that stretched beyond mortal understanding. Here, too, language is not portrayed as a human invention. It is sacred, cosmic, placed into our hands by a being who existed before us. Writing especially is framed as revelation, a descent of order into the chaos of silence. In the Egyptian imagination, the act of putting symbols to stone was a way of aligning human thought with divine truth. Words were not just tools. They were spells. They were bridges. And then there is Saraswati, the Hindu goddess of speech, knowledge, and learning. Often depicted with a book, a rosary, and a flowing river, she embodies the current of words that sustains civilization. In ancient hymns, she is invoked as Vak, the very voice of creation. To speak her name was to acknowledge that language itself had a divine source, an origin in the sacred rather than the mundane. For those who worshipped her, words were not accidental sounds. They were currents of truth flowing through the world, and Saraswati was their fountain. What unites these myths, scattered across continents, is not simply their reverence for speech, but their insistence that it comes from elsewhere. Humanity receives language. It does not craft it alone. Whether by a god's design, a goddess's blessing, or a divine act of disruption, words are framed as external, bestowed. Pause with that thought for a moment. Across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, the human imagination settled on a strikingly similar intuition, that the ability to speak and write was too profound to be entirely our own. Why did so many civilizations look upward or outward when trying to explain it? Why did they see in their words something too luminous, too ordered, too extraordinary to have come from the ground? Perhaps the answer is simple. Words change everything. They allow stories to outlive the storyteller. They transform breath into permanence. They make the invisible thoughts, dreams, prayers into something that can be shared. To our ancestors, that must have felt like magic. And what is magic if not the touch of something greater? Imagine standing among the builders of Babel, hearing the sudden confusion of tongues. Imagine sitting in an Egyptian temple, a priest carving hieroglyphs into stone, whispering invocations to Thoth. Imagine listening to a hymn on the banks of the Saraswati River as poets declare that the goddess herself flows through their verses. In each case, language is not an accident. It is a thread to the divine. Now, from the perspective of modern science, these are stories, not proofs. The Tower of Babel has no archaeological evidence. Thoth belongs to the pantheon of myth. Saraswati may be linked to an actual river now lost in the deserts of northwest India, but her role as goddess is symbolic. And yet, symbols often carry truths that data cannot. They tell us not what happened, but what mattered. And what mattered, universally, was the conviction that language felt too immense to belong solely to human invention. This raises a quiet but persistent possibility. Could myths preserve not only imagination but memory? Could the stories of gods gifting language be echoes of an older event, an encounter with something beyond ourselves? Maybe not gods in the literal sense, but beings who seemed divine to those who first received the gift. What if Babel, Thoth, Saraswati, and countless unnamed others are fragments of a deeper human memory? encoded in myth to survive the forgetting of time. Science resists such speculation, and yet the resonance of these stories remains. Perhaps that resonance is itself a clue, not to external visitors, but to the sheer improbability of language. Perhaps human beings have always felt that our words are not quite ours, that they arrive in us like visitors, flowing through us rather than from us. The poet who says words came to them in a dream, the mystic who insists their hymns are dictated by the divine, the ordinary person who whispers, "I don't know where the words came from," all speak to this same intuition. Language feels gifted because, in some sense, it island, whether from the cosmos, from gods, or from the hidden depths of our own minds, it comes to us as something astonishing, something more than the sum of mouth and breath. And so the myths linger. They remind us that the question of origin is not only about biology and archaeology, it is about meaning. Even if language did evolve step by step, even if no god ever carved the first word into stone, the feeling that words are gifts is inseparable from our experience of them. They arrive in us like sparks. They move through us like rivers. They are larger than we are, which is why the next layer of myth is so intriguing. For beyond the gods who bestowed language, there are also tales of culture bringers, beings who came among us not as deities, but as teachers. Their stories are less about divine decree and more about encounter, and in those encounters, language is not commanded from above, but taught, shared, remembered. And that is where we must wander next, into the legends of the culture bringers, the strange figures who stepped out of sea foam or starlight to show humanity how to speak, to write, and to remember. In many traditions, the story of language and knowledge does not end with gods alone. It shifts into another pattern, one that is quieter but just as strange, the tales of culture bringers. These are not distant deities who thunder commands from the heavens, but figures who arrive close, who walk among humans, who teach, who share. They are the ones who pass down the arts of writing, the rhythms of speech, the structure of memory. And in the folds of their stories, we glimpse an even more haunting suggestion that humanity may not have invented its own civilization entirely alone. Consider Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of Mesoamerican lore. His image ripples across temple walls in Mexico, feathers flowing into scales, wings blending into coils. To the peoples of the Aztec and Toltec worlds, Quetzalcoatl was not simply a god of the sky. He was the giver of maize, the bringer of knowledge, the teacher of calendars and crafts. It was said that he descended among humans not to rule but to instruct, teaching them how to live, how to remember, how to speak in the ways of ritual and order. Quetzalcoatl's gifts were not of weapons or conquest. They were of structure, meaning, and continuity. Through him, culture took form. Far to the east, in the cradle of Mesopotamia, another figure rises from the waves. Oannes, the fish-clad teacher of Babylonian legend. The ancient historian Berosus wrote of him, describing how this strange being emerged each morning from the sea, half man and half fish, clothed in scales yet speaking with perfect clarity. Oannes did not frighten humanity. Instead, he instructed them in writing, mathematics, agriculture, and law. He taught them how to build cities, how to organize life beyond the hunt, how to keep records and preserve knowledge. At night he returned to the ocean, vanishing until the dawn, only to rise again and continue his teachings. Here too the pattern holds, a being not human, not quite divine, yet present teaching, guiding, shaping. And what is most striking is not the strangeness of his form, but the specificity of his gifts. He does not bestow thunderbolts or miracles. He bestows writing. He bestows language structured into memory. He bestows the framework of civilization itself. And then there is Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger of the Greeks. Unlike Oannes, He does not crawl from the sea. Unlike Quetzalcoatl, he does not appear as a serpent crowned in feathers. Hermes is a trickster, a wanderer, a guide between worlds. He is credited with inventing the alphabet, with bringing the gift of writing to humankind, with shaping the ways in which words could be preserved. To the Greeks, he was not only the messenger of the gods, but the bridge between speech and permanence. What was spoken could be forgotten, but what was written endured. Hermes was the one who showed humanity how to carve sound into symbol, ensuring that memory could outlast the breath that carried it. 3 cultures, 3 continents, 3 beings clothed in very different imagery, and yet they share a striking motif. Each brings not just sustenance or shelter, but knowledge structured into words. Each acts as a teacher. Each gifts humanity with a tool that lifts us beyond survival into something larger. If you pause here and let the idea settle, you begin to see a pattern that extends far beyond these 3 names. Polynesian myths tell of figures who taught navigation across the stars. Sumerian legends speak of the Apkallu, sage-like beings sent to deliver wisdom to early humans. In countless traditions, there are echoes of teachers' figures who arrive suddenly, bearing skills and stories that seem to leap ahead of their time. It is tempting to read all of this as metaphor. Perhaps Quetzalcoatl was a way of personifying the discovery of agriculture. Perhaps Oannes was a symbolic mask for the shift from oral to written culture. Perhaps Hermes embodied the dawning of trade and communication between city-states. And yet, the recurrence of the motif is difficult to ignore. Across oceans, across millennia, humans told themselves that their knowledge did not rise from within, alone it came from without. What if this was more than story? Let your mind wander for a moment into the speculative. Imagine that long ago, humanity was not entirely alone in shaping its own destiny. Imagine that there were encounters, perhaps rare, perhaps misunderstood, where another intelligence brushed against us. Perhaps it was terrestrial, an older species whose traces are now lost. Perhaps it was something from beyond, wandering travelers who left no machines behind but words, rhythms, methods of memory. To those who met them, they would have seemed godlike, and in remembering them, myth clothed them in feathers, scales, and wings. Could Quetzalcoatl be a memory of a teacher whose true form has been forgotten? Could Oannes be a story of a visitor who emerged not from the literal sea, but from the unknown depths of human prehistory? Could Hermes be a symbolic echo of an encounter with something that reshaped our minds? We cannot say. Science demands evidence, and myths are not fossils. But even as stories, they whisper something extraordinary that human beings instinctively sensed. Language and memory were not inventions of the moment, but legacies, gifts, inheritances. Think about your own life. Every word you speak is one you did not invent. Every phrase you utter has been shaped by centuries of memory. Language feels like yours, but it is borrowed. It is a current you step into, not a river you created. And when cultures remembered teachers, beings who arrived with knowledge, they may have been echoing that same truth on a grander scale. Whether myth or memory, the figure of the culture bringer leaves us with haunting possibilities. If our words came to us as a gift, then perhaps we are not the first speakers of language on this planet. Perhaps we are only the most recent inheritors. And so the stories invite us to ask, are we remembering encounters with gods, or are we recalling moments when an older species placed its legacy within us? Did Quetzalcoatl, Oannes, Hermes, and the others emerge from imagination alone, or are they the shadows of real teachers, now lost to history, but surviving in the only way they could, through myth? No answers tonight, only questions. But they are questions worth lingering on. Because if even a fragment of these stories holds truth, then the very words you are hearing now may not belong only to us. They may carry whispers from those who spoke before, long before, in ages we can scarcely imagine. If myths suggest that language was given, science has tried to trace how it spread. And in that search, scholars have followed a trail that leads not to gods, but to patterns, patterns hidden in the words we still speak. For though languages today seem impossibly diverse, scattered across continents and shaped by countless centuries, many of them carry echoes of something older, something shared. Linguists call it Proto-Indo-European, a reconstructed language that may have been spoken thousands of years ago, long before writing fixed words in clay or carved them into stone. It is not a language anyone has heard directly. No recordings exist, no inscriptions remain. And yet, through the careful comparison of living tongues, fragments have been pieced together, roots and sounds that seem to repeat across cultures, stretching from the forests of Europe to the plains of India. Take the word for mother. In English, it is mother. In German, Mutter. In Sanskrit, Matra. In Latin, Mater. In Persian, Mada. Across vast distances and centuries, the similarity is unmistakable. Or consider brother, brother, bruder, bratri, prater. Again, the resonance is clear. From such echoes, linguists have traced backward, building the skeleton of a language that no one alive today ever spoke, but which may have given rise to hundreds of others. The picture that emerges is of a people pastoral, migratory, perhaps dwelling on the steppes of Eurasia around 6,000 years ago. They may have traveled with herds, carried simple tools, sung songs that no longer survive. But their words did survive, embedded in the tongues of their descendants. Like seeds scattered across continents, those words sprouted into thousands of languages, branching and dividing, but never entirely losing the shape of their common roots. There is something haunting about this. To speak an English sentence, or to recite a verse in Sanskrit, or to tell a story in Latin long ago, is to breathe life into sounds that stretch back through millennia. It is to echo a tongue that has not been heard in its full form for thousands of years. The air you exhale carries whispers from a world that has vanished. And yet, even Proto-Indo-European is not the end of the trail. It is only one reconstructed ancestor among many. Other language families, Afro-Asiatic, Sino-Tibetan, Niger-Congo, have their own roots, their own proto-languages that scholars attempt to reconstruct. Each of these is like a great tree, with branches that spread and leaves that whisper, all leading back to a trunk we can barely glimpse. But then comes the most daring idea of all. What if all of these trunks lead back further still? What if, beyond Proto-Indo-European, beyond Proto-Sino-Tibetan, beyond every proto-language we can trace, there once was a single mother tongue, a language spoken by the earliest humans from which all others descended? Some call this the proto-world hypothesis. It is controversial, to say the least. The evidence grows fainter the further back one goes, and at a certain point the trail dissolves into speculation. But the thought lingers. Could all the world's languages, in their dazzling diversity, be variations on a single original melody? Could every word you have ever spoken, from a simple hello to a whispered prayer, carry an echo of the first human word ever uttered? If that word were spoken now, would we recognize it? Would it sound familiar, primal, resonant? Or would it be incomprehensible, a sound stripped of all meaning, its significance long since eroded by time? Think for a moment of what that first word might have been. Was it a cry of fear in the night, warning of danger? Was it a call to kin, binding families together? Was it a name, an attempt to hold the world in sound, naming a river, a star, a beloved face? Or was it something more abstract, a word for yes or no, an attempt to fix agreement in sound? Whatever it was, it must have been small. And yet, from that smallness, the entire architecture of human thought would rise. There is a strange poetry here. Science, in its methodical way, reconstructs proto-languages, syllable by syllable. Myth, in its imaginative way, tells us language was given by gods or culture bringers. And between the two lies the haunting question of the first word. Whether bestowed or invented, whether divine or evolutionary, it was the pebble that began the avalanche. The linguists who study Proto-Indo-European sometimes reconstruct sentences, playful attempts at breathing life into the lost tongue. They are clumsy, speculative, fragile. But in those syllables, there is a sense of reaching backward into the fog, of trying to recover a memory the species has almost forgotten. And even if those reconstructions are imperfect, they point to a truth. Language is not just a tool of the present, it is an inheritance. Each word you speak is a fossil, shaped by countless generations, carrying within it echoes of voices that once called across firelit nights long before cities rose. Now, pause and imagine what it would mean if the proto-world hypothesis were true, if there really was a first tongue shared by all humanity before migration scattered us across continents, before isolation fractured sound into dialects, and dialects into languages. That would mean that, hidden deep within the patterns of every word spoken today, there remains a trace of a single voice. A voice that may not have belonged to us entirely, for if myths are right, perhaps that original language was not invented, but gifted. Perhaps proto-world was not merely human invention, but a seed planted in our ancestors, growing and dividing into the forest of tongues we now inhabit. If so, then every language spoken today, from the smallest tribal dialect to the most widespread global tongue, would be a branch of something older, something not entirely of this earth. Of course, science cannot prove this. It may never be able to. But in the space between certainty and silence lies wonder, and wonder is where we find ourselves tonight. The search for proto-languages is not just academic, it is deeply human, for in chasing the first words, we are chasing our own beginning. And beginnings, as myths remind us, are rarely simple. They are gifts, they are mysteries, they are moments when something shifts forever. If the reconstructed proto-languages point us back to ancestral voices, there remains a deeper, more daring question. What lies beyond them? When the trees of language converge into forests, when the forests themselves narrow into a single path, do they lead us back to one origin, one root, one tongue that carried the first breath of meaning? This is the idea of a proto-world language, a single, primordial tongue spoken by humanity's earliest ancestors. It would not be English, or Sanskrit, or Sumerian, or any other familiar voice. It would be older than writing, older than myth, older even than memory itself. A language that perhaps emerged with the first Homo sapiens, or even earlier, spoken around campfires under unfamiliar skies. Words rising with the smoke into the night. The hypothesis is controversial, fragile, and impossible to prove with certainty. Words erode more quickly than stone. Traces vanish after only a few thousand years, and proto-world, if it existed, would reach back tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands. And yet, the idea persists. Because the possibility that all our languages, with their vast variety, might spring from a single seed feels strangely plausible, even inevitable. Imagine it. Every word you know, every poem, every lullaby, every argument, every prayer carrying within it the distant echo of one original sound. A sound uttered by ancestors whose faces we cannot picture, whose world we can scarcely imagine, but whose voices still ripple invisibly through time. The question, then, is whether that first language was invented by humans or given to them. Myth and science converge uneasily here. On the one hand, linguists imagine proto-world as the natural product of human evolution. Early hominins developing sounds that gradually became codified into patterns, rules, and meaning. But myth suggests something different. It whispers that the first tongue was not grown from silence, but planted. that it came suddenly, like rain in a desert, transforming everything at once. Consider what a seed tongue might mean. If another species, older and wiser, had sought to leave a mark on Earth, language would be the perfect gift. Not fire, not tools, not monuments, but words. For words carry knowledge forward, multiplying it, preserving it, extending it far beyond the limits of any single lifetime. To give language would be to give continuity, to give civilization itself in embryo. And if such a gift were planted, how would we know? We would not find metal or stone. We would not uncover ruins or artifacts. We would only find the patterns of words themselves, echoes, structures, similarities that stretch across cultures with uncanny persistence. And indeed, that is what we see. Languages as far apart as Quechua in South America and Finnish in the north of Europe share fragments of structure, faint patterns that suggest something older than either. These similarities could be coincidence, or they could be the footprints of a lost inheritance. Let your mind drift with the speculation. Picture early humans in the deep Pleistocene night, gathered around fires, their communication still bound mostly to gesture and cry. Then, imagine a moment, an encounter, or a sudden change when words arrive. Not clumsy grunts, but structured sounds. A pattern that can carry thought, perhaps taught by figures who seemed impossibly strange. Perhaps awakened in the mind by something coded long before. A seed that lay dormant until the time was right, until the soil of human consciousness was ready to receive it. What if the proto-world language was not born of trial and error, but of intention, not the slow shaping of lips and throats, but the deliberate planting of meaning? The thought is unsettling, but also strangely comforting, for it suggests that we are part of a legacy larger than ourselves, that our voices, far from being accidents of evolution, are continuations of a much older design. And yet, even if no such givers existed, the fact remains: language behaves like a seed. It grows, it branches, it spreads. It adapts to new environments. It dies in some places and flourishes in others. And like a seed, it carries within it the blueprint of what it can become. A single proto-language, spoken tens of thousands of years ago, has grown into thousands of living tongues today. The diversity is astonishing, but the root may have been one. Linguists searching for proto-world have tried to identify ultra-conserved words, sounds and terms that may have survived across vast time. Words like I, you, mother, man, fire, to hear, to give, simple, primal, essential. If these words really echo across the oldest language families, then we may already be hearing the whispers of proto-world every time we speak. Think about that. When you say the word mother, you may be repeating a sound that has been spoken continuously for tens of thousands of years. A sound first uttered by people long vanished, but preserved in the endless chain of human memory. And if those first sounds were indeed planted, then perhaps every word we speak is more than communication. Perhaps it is participation joining in a chorus that began before recorded time, a chorus that may not have been ours to begin with. This is the haunting beauty of the proto-world hypothesis. Whether it was invented or given, it reminds us that our words are older than our histories. They are the one inheritance every human carries, regardless of culture, creed, or place. Science may never recover that first language in full. The trail is too faint, the evidence too fragile. But imagination allows us to lean closer, to wonder whether our voices are not only human, but echoes of something else, an original melody, seeded long ago, still vibrating in every syllable we speak. And that thought carries us further still, into the question of how language transformed not just our tongues, but our civilizations. For once the seed was planted, however it came, it did not remain in speech alone. It leapt into symbol, into writing, into permanence. When we follow the trail of language forward, we find ourselves standing at one of the most astonishing thresholds in human history, the invention of writing. If spoken words were the first fire, then writing was the moment we learned to capture flame and carry it with us across generations. And yet, here the mystery deepens, because unlike other inventions, writing does not appear to crawl into existence step by step. It arrives suddenly, already complex, already powerful, as if it had leapt into being fully grown. Take Sumerian cuneiform, carved into wet clay more than 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. The earliest tablets we have are not hesitant scratchings, not half-formed attempts. They are lists, records, contracts already systematic, already sophisticated. Little wedge-shaped impressions, pressed with a reed stylus, forming an entire system of communication. Within only a few centuries, that system expanded into myth and poetry, the Epic of Gilgamesh etched into clay. It is as though writing appeared not as a child, but as an adult, already walking with confidence. Now turn to Egyptian hieroglyphs. Here too, the earliest examples are not crude experiments. They are strikingly refined. On temple walls and tombs, birds, eyes, serpents, and suns flow together in a visual symphony. They do not look like the stumbling beginnings of script. They look like something already complete, already formalized. Scholars still debate whether hieroglyphs evolved independently or were influenced by Mesopotamian systems, but either way, their early elegance suggests a leap rather than a crawl. And then, far to the east, we find the Chinese oracle bones, dating back more than 3,000 years. On the surfaces of turtle shells and animal scapulae, questions were carved with heated metal, then cracked by fire. The cracks were read as omens, but the inscriptions themselves reveal something more. A script already structured, already complex, capable of recording not only rituals but entire narratives. These marks are the ancestors of the Chinese characters still in use today, a line of continuity stretching unbroken across millennia. Here lies the enigma. If writing is an invention, why do we not see more of its evolution? Why do we not find centuries of half-systems, crude marks slowly refined into symbols, symbols slowly refined into language? With other technologies, stone tools, metallurgy, agriculture, we see long chains of development, gradual improvements. But with writing, the evidence is sparse. It seems to burst into the world already knowing itself. Some scholars suggest that those missing steps simply dissolved with time. Perhaps they were carved on perishable materials, wood, bark, fabric that have long since vanished. Perhaps the experiments existed but left no trace. But another possibility is more unsettling. What if writing really did arrive suddenly, not as a slow accumulation, but as a revelation? Think of it this way. Speech is ephemeral. Once spoken, a word vanishes into air. But writing is permanence. It is the act of pinning sound into matter, of binding memory into clay and stone. To discover such a thing by accident seems improbable. To devise it in its fullness without long trial seems extraordinary. Could it be that, like language itself, writing was also a gift? In Mesopotamian myth, writing was linked to the god Nabu, keeper of the tablets of destiny. In Egypt, it was Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of the gods. In China, legends spoke of Kangjie, a culture hero who invented characters after watching the tracks of animals and the shapes of constellations. In each case, writing is not portrayed as the gradual work of trial and error, but as a sudden bestowal, a moment when the power to fix words into permanence entered human hands. Consider the impact. With writing, memory no longer died with the speaker. Knowledge could leap across generations without distortion. Laws could be fixed, stories preserved, histories recorded. Empires rose upon the strength of scribes, temples filled with incantations and hymns. trade blossomed with contracts and records. Writing was not just a tool, it was civilization's backbone. And yet, the leap still astonishes. Why here? Why then? Why in so few places? Out of all the thousands of human cultures, only a handful invented writing independently. Sumer, Egypt, China, Mesoamerica. The rest of the world received it second-hand, adapted it, transformed it, but did not create it from nothing. That concentration itself is a mystery. Why should the gift of permanence arrive in only a few cradles, and why with such sudden maturity? Let your thoughts drift here, into the speculative. What if, in some sense, writing was planted as well? If language was the seed of thought, perhaps writing was the seed of memory. Perhaps the suddenness we see in the archaeological record reflects not a missing chain of accidents, but the deliberate transmission of a tool, a blueprint handed down, disguised in myth as divine inspiration. Of course, science does not accept such speculation easily. It insists on evidence, on fragments, on traceable evolution. And yet, even within that framework, the strangeness of writing's arrival remains one of the unsolved puzzles of human history. Why do we see so much sudden order where we would expect long chaos? Why do our earliest scripts look like adults, not children? Whatever the reason, the effect is undeniable. Writing transformed the human story. It made laws, literature, and history possible. It gave humanity the ability to step outside the limits of memory and place thought into the stream of time itself. And whether it came through trial, myth, or gift, it stands as one of the most mysterious leaps in our journey. If the great writing systems of Sumer, Egypt, and China arrived as sudden leaps into permanence, there are other scripts scattered across history that puzzle us even more. They appear like isolated stars, bright, strange, undeciphered, offering glimpses of worlds of meaning that we cannot enter. These scripts feel almost alien, not because they are beyond human capacity, but because their voices remain sealed, refusing to yield their secrets no matter how carefully we press against their surfaces. Take the Indus Valley script, carved and stamped across seals more than 4,000 years ago in the ancient cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. These were settlements of astonishing scale, with grid-like streets, sophisticated drainage, and signs of vibrant trade. Yet among their artifacts are hundreds of symbols, etched into tiny squares of steatite. They are not random. They repeat in patterns, short sequences, combinations that look very much like a system of writing. And yet, despite decades of effort, no one has cracked their code. Part of the mystery lies in their brevity. Most inscriptions are only a few symbols long, as though they were names, labels, or tokens. Without longer texts, decipherment is almost impossible. Were they a form of proto-writing, never fully developed into narrative? Or were they a complete language, rich and structured, now silenced forever? We cannot know. The people who once carved those symbols left no Rosetta Stone, no parallel translation to guide us. The script remains mute, even as the ruins of their cities whisper of lives once lived in remarkable complexity. Then there is Rongorongo, the enigmatic script of Easter Island. When European explorers arrived in the 18th century, they found wooden tablets covered in flowing glyphs, curved, organic shapes arranged in lines that followed a peculiar pattern, one line written left to right, the next right to left, in a system known as boustrophedon, like the turning of an ox plough in a field. The people of the island, however, had already lost the key. Oral traditions spoke of the script, but by the time it was documented, the knowledge of how to read it had vanished, erased by colonization, disease, and cultural upheaval. Today, scholars debate whether Rongorongo was truly a full writing system or a mnemonic aid for chants and genealogies. But either way, it represents something extraordinary, a script that emerged in isolation, far from the centers of the ancient world. How did it arise? What knowledge did it carry? And why did it disappear so completely that even its own people could no longer speak its meaning? And then there is the Phaistos disc, unearthed on the island of Crete in 1908. This small clay disc, no larger than a human hand, bears symbols arranged in a spiral, pressed into the clay with stamps. Unlike most scripts, which evolved gradually, the Phaistos disc looks deliberate, as though created in a single moment, with a set of pre-designed characters. Scholars have compared it to linear A and B, to Egyptian hieroglyphs, to Anatolian scripts, but no consensus has ever been reached. Its spiral inscription feels both familiar and otherworldly, as though it does not quite belong to the systems around it. Some have even wondered if it is a forgery, though the evidence suggests otherwise. Whatever it is, its meaning is locked away. What unites these examples, the Indus symbols, the flowing glyphs of Rongorongo, the spiral of the Phaistos disc, is their silence. They confront us with the shape of language, but not its sound. They are locked doors without keys, and in that silence, speculation flourishes. Could these out-of-place scripts be remnants of something older? Fragments of a language we no longer understand because it was never entirely ours to begin with. If speech itself was a gift, might these undeciphered writings be echoes of the same legacy, half-remembered, misunderstood, fading before they could fully take root? Imagine for a moment that another species, long vanished, once left traces of their communication among us. Not machines or monuments, but words, symbols, scripts. Would we even recognize them if we found them? Or would we, like with Rongorongo and the Indus seals, press against them endlessly without ever opening the lock? It is possible, of course, that these scripts are entirely human inventions, lost simply through the accidents of history. Civilizations collapse, knowledge disappears, fires consume libraries, invaders suppress traditions. Silence often follows conquest, and yet there is something in their strangeness that lingers. Something in their refusal to yield that makes them feel as though they are more than mere fragments of history. Perhaps it is only projection, or perhaps it is the whisper of an older voice, one that speaks to us still, but in a tongue we no longer remember. Think of the Indus seals in particular. Thousands of people must have known their meaning. They stamped them, traded them, used them daily. To those hands, the symbols were not mystery but clarity, and yet to us, 4,000 years later, they are shadows. That is the fragility of language. Without continuity, without memory, meaning collapses into silence. Now think of Rongorongo. Within only a few generations, an entire writing system was forgotten, erased by history's brutal weight. To its creators, it was alive. To us, it is a riddle. The line between understanding and forgetting is thin. If even a culture in the 18th century could lose its script, how much more might have been lost in the deep prehistory before records began? And so, as we gaze at these undeciphered writings, we are left to wonder, are they merely the ruins of forgotten cultures? Or are they hints of something deeper? Could they be the surviving shards of a language older than humanity, misunderstood because it was never truly ours? We may never know. The symbols remain stubbornly silent, but perhaps that silence is itself a message that not all knowledge is meant to be reclaimed, that some gifts vanish as mysteriously as they appear. For all the mysteries carved in stone, another puzzle lies hidden even deeper within us, in the folds of our DNA. If language feels like a gift, if it arrives in myth as sudden bestowal and in history as sudden leap, the question becomes sharper still when we turn to genetics. Why us, and why only us? At first glance, the difference between humans and our nearest relatives seems almost negligible. We share about 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees. We have similar bones, similar organs, even similar emotions flickering across our faces. Chimps laugh, grieve, and form bonds. Bonobos negotiate peace through touch. Gorillas have been taught to use sign language, pointing and gesturing in ways that seem eerily close to conversation. And yet, for all of this, none of them speak as we do. None build sentences with nested clauses. None tell stories of the past or imagine futures that have not yet come. Why? The answer seems to lie in part within a single gene, FOXP2. Discovered in the late 20th century through the study of a British family with a striking inherited speech disorder, FOXP2 has since become one of the most famous genes in the world. Members of that family struggled not with intelligence, but with the very mechanics of grammar and articulation. They could think, but their ability to string words into sentences faltered. The fault was traced to a mutation in FOXP2. Further study revealed something astonishing. Humans have a slightly different version of this gene compared to chimpanzees, only a few amino acids apart, and yet the effects are profound. These changes alter the way neural circuits form in the brain, especially in regions tied to motor control, learning, and sequencing. In essence, FOXP2 helps build the pathways that allow us to connect thought, tongue, and syntax into fluid speech. Think of it this way. Millions of years of evolution shaped countless species of primates. And yet, with just a handful of molecular tweaks, humans stepped into a new dimension, the world of language. A gulf opened, not in bodies, but in voices. And what makes this puzzle deeper is its suddenness. Genetic studies suggest that the human version of FOXP2 spread rapidly through our species roughly 200,000 years ago, perhaps even less. It appears as though a neurological switch was flipped. One generation may have spoken in fragmented calls, while the next, through a subtle shift in DNA, could weave thoughts into speech. The speed of this change unsettles many researchers. Evolution is often slow, incremental, a game of gradual refinements. Yet here, in the heart of what makes us human, we see something that looks less like drift and more like leap. Why should such a transformative ability emerge so quickly and in only one lineage? And there is another layer still. FOXP2 does not act alone. It influences networks of genes, cascading effects across the brain and vocal tract. Some of these effects are still poorly understood. But the implication is clear. Somewhere in our past, a constellation of genetic events reshaped us in ways no other species experienced. This raises the haunting question: was it purely natural, or does it bear the shape of something more deliberate? Speculation whispers here. If one were to engineer language into a species, one might not need to alter the entire genome. A few precise edits could be enough, nudging neurons to fire differently, wiring circuits for syntax, adjusting the larynx and tongue for articulation. Could FOXP2 be more than an accident? Could it be a marker of intervention, an invisible signature etched into the heart of our biology? Science, of course, resists such thoughts. It points instead to natural selection, to the survival advantages of speech. Those who could coordinate more effectively, who could share warnings or plans, who could teach skills through words, would have flourished. Their genes would have spread, and perhaps that is enough. Perhaps FOXP2 is simply the right mutation at the right time, preserved because it offered enormous benefit. And yet, the leap remains startling. For if it was only natural selection, why has no other species come close? Why do dolphins, with their large brains and complex societies, not develop syntax? Why do elephants, with their intricate memory and communication, not form grammar? Why are humans alone in crossing this boundary when so many others hovered near? The silence of that question is heavy. Imagine for a moment an early hominin child born with the altered gene. Around her, her family communicates with gestures, with cries, with simple signals. But in her mind, something different unfolds. She strings ideas together. She names objects not with one cry but with combinations of sounds. She asks questions. She answers them. And slowly, her community begins to shift around her, adopting her gift, spreading it. Within only a few generations, language takes hold not as scattered signals, but as full architecture. That is one possibility. Another is stranger. Perhaps the alteration did not arise spontaneously, but was guided. If there were older beings, whether terrestrial or not, who wished to lift humanity into a new state, what better way than through language? By shaping our genes, they would shape our thoughts. By planting syntax in our brains, they would plant the seeds of culture, memory, and civilization. In this view, FOXP2 is not just a gene, it is an inscription, a message written not in clay or stone, but in the code of life itself. A silent script passed from cell to cell, ensuring that every human born carries within them the ability to speak, to imagine, to share. Whether you find this speculation plausible or fanciful, the mystery remains. FOXP2, with its tiny differences, transformed us. From it came speech, from speech came stories, from stories came civilizations, a few letters of genetic code, and the world shifted forever. And yet, even now, we do not fully understand it. We do not know why it emerged so quickly, why it spread so thoroughly, why it did not arise in other species. We can only marvel at its effects, and wonder if we are truly the sole authors of this transformation. Language is in our blood, quite literally. It is not only in our tongues and throats, but in the instructions carried in every cell of our bodies. And in that, it remains one of the deepest puzzles of our existence. If language truly lies in our blood, encoded in the spirals of DNA, then the question becomes more than biological. It becomes existential. For if something so profound is written into us, we must ask, who wrote it? Was it only the blind hand of evolution? Or could it have been something else, something older, something deliberate? The idea may sound unsettling, but let's let it breathe for a moment. What if the capacity for language did not arise by accident, but was implanted, coded into our very being by another intelligence? What if the leap from silence to speech was not simply the outcome of mutation, but an upgrade, a modification designed to push us towards civilization? This is the heart of the engineered voices, speculation, that early hominins, wandering the plains of Africa with crude tools and simple cries, were altered, whether subtly nudged or profoundly changed, so that their descendants could speak, and from that speech, everything else would follow. Think of the implications. Fire, agriculture, trade, myth, mathematics, astronomy, all of it depends on words. Without language, there can be no continuity of knowledge, no preservation of wisdom, no coordination of effort. A gift of speech is not merely a gift of sound, it is the gift of civilization itself. Now, if you were a species with the power to shape another, and you wished to leave behind a legacy, what better gift could you give than this? Tools rust, monuments crumble, but words endure, carried from mouth to mouth, etched eventually into stone, encoded now in glowing screens. To alter a species genetically so that language becomes inevitable is to create a vessel for memory, a living archive that will continue long after your own presence has vanished. Some who explore this possibility point again to FOXP2, that mysterious gene whose changes seem to have rewired our brains for syntax and learning. It is tempting to see it not as a random mutation, but as a signature, an edit, precise and targeted, like a line of code altered by an unseen hand. If so, then perhaps our voices are not entirely our own. They are echoes of an older intention, resonances of a choice made long before history began. Of course, science resists this. It prefers explanations grounded in natural selection, Language gave survival advantages, so those who had it flourished, and perhaps that is enough. Yet the suddenness of the shift, the exclusivity of its appearance in humans alone, continues to trouble the narrative. Evolution is usually slow, but language seems to have been fast. Evolution is usually diverse, experimenting in many branches, but language appears to have blossomed in only one. It is this strangeness that invites speculation. And what of the myths? We have already seen how many cultures told stories of gods or culture bringers who bestowed language. Could these be metaphorical memories of something real? Encounters with beings who altered us not through teaching alone, but through the deep script of biology itself. If a shepherd god or feathered serpent or fish-clad teacher seemed to bestow words, perhaps that story was an attempt to describe something beyond comprehension, the sudden arrival of speech in human minds. Imagine the scene: an early hominin child, born with a voice unlike her kin. She strings sounds together in ways no one has before. At first, the others do not understand, but slowly they begin to mimic, to adopt. A generation passes, and what was once strange becomes normal. Another generation, and it spreads further. Within a few centuries, language saturates the species, transforming the way humans live, love, and dream. It looks like evolution, but what if, at its root, it was intervention? Some have even speculated that humanity's rapid rise, our leap from simple toolmakers to builders of cities, was too fast, too sudden, to be entirely natural. From the caves of southern Africa to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia was a blink in geological time. Could it be that the upgrade of language was the catalyst, the switch that turned potential into inevitability? If so, then our entire civilization may rest on a foundation we did not build ourselves. Every library, every story, every whispered word between lovers or shouted command in battle, echoes of a choice made not by us, but for us. This thought is unsettling, yes, but also strangely beautiful. For if our voices were engineered, then we are participants in a legacy older than our species. We are carriers of intention, even if we do not know its source. Our words are not only ours, they are continuations of an older design. And yet, the absence of evidence makes this idea forever uncertain. There are no inscriptions on our genes declaring, "This was written by another hand." There are no fossils that bear the mark of deliberate alteration. What we have instead are patterns, the sudden leap of FOXP2, the uniqueness of human speech, the persistence of myths that describe language as gift rather than invention. Patterns that can be read in many ways, but which always point to the same central enigma: why us, and why so suddenly? Tonight, as you listen to these words, you might imagine that very enigma echoing through you. Every syllable you hear is the result of muscles shaped by ancient shifts, neurons sculpted by forces we only partly understand. Whether those forces were chance or design, their outcome is the same: the ability to listen, to speak, to share meaning across the darkness of time. And perhaps that is the real gift. Whether engineered or evolved, language makes us more than ourselves. It links us across generations, across cultures, across centuries. It is the upgrade that turned survival into civilization, biology into memory, sound into thought. And it continues still, flowing from your ears into your mind, from your mind into dreams you may not even know you are carrying. When we peel back the surface of speech, another layer of mystery emerges, because language, for all its poetry and emotion, is also a system. It has rules, structures, and patterns so precise that some linguists have compared it not to music or art, but to code. Think about the way sentences are built. A handful of words can be arranged and rearranged to create infinite meanings. Grammar, syntax, and semantics form the scaffolding. If you strip away the sound, what remains is a set of instructions like commands written for a machine. subject, verb, object, condition, consequence, loops, recursion, embedding. The very features that make language flexible are the same ones that make programming languages powerful. It is no coincidence that when humans designed computers, they taught them to speak in code. The logic of if, then, while, do, and or is already hidden in our speech. We did not invent that structure for machines. We borrowed it from the architecture of our own minds. In a sense, every time you speak, you are running a program, executing lines of code shaped not by silicon but by evolution, or perhaps by something older still. This is where Noam Chomsky's idea of universal grammar enters. Chomsky argued that all human languages, despite their dazzling variety, share a deep underlying structure. Children do not learn language from scratch. They are born with a template, a framework already built into their brains. This is why infants can absorb language so quickly, why they can generate sentences they have never heard before, why every culture's speech, however different, rests on similar foundations. If this is true, then language is not something we merely acquire. It is something already coded into us, waiting to be activated. A seed planted in the neural soil, ready to sprout the moment it hears the voices around it. But where did that seed come from? If universal grammar is real, then it suggests that our brains are preloaded with instructions. Instructions not for one language, but for all possible languages. A blueprint of communication, ready to be adapted into English, or Mandarin, or Swahili, or Navajo, or any of the thousands of tongues humans speak. That universality is astonishing. It is as though the mind carries within it a hidden operating system, one that anticipates diversity but insists on structure. And here, speculation stirs again. If language is code, who or what wrote it? We could say nature, of course. Evolution built the brain, and the brain built language. But the comparison to programming lingers. Programs are written by programmers. Systems are designed. Could it be that our capacity for speech is not merely a side effect of survival, but the result of something more intentional? Could language itself be a form of coding implanted within us? A system not invented but inherited? Imagine, for a moment, that humanity is like a vast network of machines, each running slightly different applications, but all built upon the same core operating system. We think we are diverse, yet beneath the surface, the same deep grammar hums within us, the same circuits, the same instructions. Could that be coincidence, or could it be design? Chomsky himself did not claim divine or alien origins. His work was rooted in linguistics, in the patterns of how children learn and how sentences are built. But his insights open a door to wonder. If universal grammar exists, then language is not just culture, it is biology, it is not just learned. And hardwiring always raises the same question: by whom? This is where the analogy to programming grows sharper. When we write code, we leave traces, loops, redundancies, efficiencies, bugs. When linguists examine languages, they find something similar. All tongues share quirks. Some grammatical rules seem arbitrary, yet they repeat across cultures. Recursion, the ability to embed thoughts within thoughts, clauses within clauses, appears everywhere. It is as if language is built from a common template, with variations layered on top. If you were to discover a piece of software running on thousands of different devices across the world, each version looking slightly different but all sharing the same hidden core, would you not suspect a single origin, a programmer behind the scenes? Now take that thought and apply it to ourselves. Across deserts and forests, across islands and continents, humans speak in thousands of ways. And yet, beneath the diversity, the same code runs. Could it be that we are all speaking variations of a language written long before our own history began? there is another angle to consider. Some researchers in artificial intelligence have noted that the way large language models, machines designed to mimic human speech, learn and generate language is eerily similar to how humans do. Patterns, probabilities, predictions. The difference is that machines must be trained from scratch, while humans seem to arrive preloaded. The child does not need millions of examples. A few years of listening is enough. As though the architecture is already in place, waiting only to be filled. This brings us back to the question of design. Did evolution stumble into such a perfect system, or did someone plant it in us? If language is code, perhaps it is not only the code of communication, but the code of consciousness itself. For what are thoughts, if not words turned inward? What is memory, if not the storage of sentences? What is imagination, if not the rearranging of symbols into new configurations? To gift a species language is to gift its selfhood. It is to write into its biology the possibility of poetry, philosophy, science, and myth. It is to place within it the ability to dream and to share those dreams with others. It is to turn silence into chorus, solitude into society. And so, as you listen now, you might wonder whether the words flowing through your mind are more than sound. Perhaps they are also code lines written long ago, still running, still executing, still unfolding through you. We may never know the true author of that code, but the fact that it exists at all, that every child is born ready to speak, ready to run the program of language, remains one of the most extraordinary puzzles of our existence. If language is a kind of code, then the mystery deepens when we ask why that code looks so similar everywhere. Across the thousands of tongues spoken on Earth, from the rainforests of the Amazon to the islands of Polynesia, from the deserts of Arabia to the mountains of Tibet, there are remarkable commonalities. The words may differ, the sounds may shift, but the structure, the way humans build sentences, the patterns of grammar, the rhythm of meaning feels strangely familiar. Noam Chomsky's theory of universal grammar sought to explain this. He argued that humans are not blank slates when it comes to language. Instead, we are born with an innate blueprint, a set of deep grammatical rules pre-installed in the mind. Languages, then, are variations on a theme. The surface features accents, vocabularies, tones are diverse, but beneath them lies the same hidden scaffolding, the same blueprint that makes human speech possible at all. Think of it like architecture. The houses of the world look different: stone huts, wooden temples, glass towers, but all are built from the same underlying principles of balance, shelter, and structure. In the same way, languages look different, but all rely on recursion, on the ability to embed thoughts within thoughts, clauses within clauses. All rely on categories like noun and verb, subject and object. These features are not inventions of culture alone. They are wired into us, part of the deep software of the human brain. But why should this be so? Why should all languages share these hidden similarities? Evolution alone might explain it. Perhaps there is only one efficient way for the brain to handle communication, and so all languages converge on the same structures. But the persistence of these similarities across such vast cultural distances invites another possibility, that they were not only evolved, but designed. Imagine for a moment that language is not simply a human adaptation, but a system given to us, seeded within us by another intelligence. If you were to design a species capable of communication, you would not want to leave the process to chance. You would create a blueprint, rules flexible enough to allow variation, but strict enough to ensure that all versions could still be learned and shared. That is what universal grammar looks like. Not chaos, but order beneath diversity. A pattern that unites the whole species, even as it allows endless creativity. It is a tantalizing thought. Could the similarities of language be the fingerprints of design? Could the universal grammar in our minds be a kind of operating system, written long ago by hands or minds we no longer remember? Let us linger here. Every child, no matter where they are born, can learn any language. A baby in Tokyo could learn Yoruba if raised in Lagos. A baby in Cairo could learn Quechua if raised in the Andes. The capacity is universal, and it emerges naturally, without formal teaching. By the age of 3, a child will be producing sentences, combining words they have never heard before, inventing grammar spontaneously. This is not rote memorization. This is the unfolding of an internal blueprint, and the blueprint is resilient. Even when children grow up without exposure to a full language, say, in isolated communities where only gestures are used, they will often invent one. Sign languages emerge, complete with grammar, syntax, and creativity. From silence, the mind produces structure, as though compelled by something deeper than culture. As though the blueprint insists on expression, no matter the medium. This resilience is one of the strongest arguments for universal grammar. It suggests that language is not an invention but a birthright, something waiting within us before we even open our mouths. But again, we must ask, where did it come from? If it was only evolution, then we are left with the puzzle of uniqueness. Why do no other species show the same blueprint? Why do dolphins, with their complex social lives, not develop grammar? Why do birds, whose songs are intricate and learned, not build recursive structures? Why do apes, so close to us genetically, not spontaneously invent syntax? The gulf remains vast, as though humans alone were granted the key to the code. Speculation leans in here. If an older species wished to pass down its legacy, perhaps it encoded that legacy not in monuments or artifacts, but in the very structure of language. The blueprint would ensure that, no matter how cultures diverged, the ability to speak and create meaning would endure. The outer garments of words would change, but the inner skeleton would remain the same. A design robust enough to outlast continents, climates, and millennia. Think of it as a hidden gift, woven into the fabric of the brain. Every human, no matter how remote their culture, would carry the same hidden capacity. Every child, no matter where they were born, would be a vessel of this legacy. And so the design would persist, not through teaching, not through writing, but through biology itself. What does it mean if this is true? It would mean that our unity as a species is older than our diversity, that beneath the thousands of tongues, the one blueprint endures, that we are not only bound by evolution, but perhaps by intention. Of course, linguistics does not claim extraterrestrial designers. It remains within the realm of human science. But even within that realm, the fact of universal grammar is staggering. It suggests that communication is not only cultural, but fundamental, written into us as surely as the ability to walk. And yet, the speculation cannot be dismissed so easily, for if language feels like code, and if all languages share the same deep structure, then perhaps we should entertain the possibility that the blueprint was given, that the universal in universal grammar is not only human, but cosmic. After all, to design a species capable of carrying knowledge, one would need to create a system both flexible and universal. Too rigid, and it would break under change. Too loose, and it would dissolve into incoherence. Universal grammar strikes the perfect balance. It allows infinite variation, but preserves deep similarity. It creates difference, but ensures unity. That balance feels less like accident and more like architecture. And so, as you listen tonight, consider that the words moving through your mind are not only human creations. They may be echoes of a blueprint written long ago, a design feature of communication itself. Every language on earth, however different, may be a branch of the same unseen tree, and that tree may not have grown wild. It may have been planted, When we look beyond ourselves into the living world that surrounds us, we find no shortage of voices. The earth hums with communication. Forests echo with birdsong, oceans ripple with the calls of whales, jungles thrum with the cries of primates. Every species has its signals, its languages of survival. And yet, when we place these side by side with human speech, a vast gulf appears so wide, so strange, that it begs the question, why only us? Take the dolphins, for example. These creatures, with brains as large as ours relative to body size, live in complex societies. They call each other by unique whistles, like names. They coordinate hunts with remarkable precision, weaving through schools of fish in choreographed spirals of sound and movement. They even play, passing seaweed like a ball, inventing games that seem almost whimsical. Some researchers believe they may even have dialects, different groups developing slightly different ways of whistling. If any animal approaches the edge of language, it is the dolphin. Or consider the whales. Humpback songs ripple through oceans, carrying across entire basins. These songs are not random. They follow patterns, verses, and refrains, evolving slowly over time, like cultural traditions. Male whales teach one another new songs, and those songs spread like fashions, sweeping across populations. There is memory here, transmission, even something like poetry. Yet for all their beauty, these songs do not carry syntax. They do not embed clauses within clauses. They move us, but they do not construct meaning the way our speech does. Birds, too, offer dazzling displays of communication. Songbirds learn their melodies from tutors, much like children learn language. They practice, repeat, refine, until their songs achieve the complexity needed to attract mates or mark territory. Some species even show regional variations, birdsong dialects, and parrots, with their uncanny ability to mimic human speech, blur the line further, repeating words in ways that make us wonder what lies behind the sound. But mimicry is not syntax. Even when they reproduce our words, parrots do not seem to generate new sentences or weave novel meanings. The structure is missing. And then there are the primates, our closest relatives. Chimpanzees use cries and gestures to signal food, danger, or social rank. They drum on tree trunks, clack stones together, and even teach their young specific calls. Bonobos, the gentler cousins of chimps, have shown a remarkable ability to learn symbolic communication with humans, pressing keys on lexicograms to request food or play. Gorillas like Coco, who learned hundreds of signs, could express emotions, desires, even sadness. Yet even here, there is a limit. These systems do not naturally grow in the wild. They are taught, and even then, they plateau. The leaps into syntax, into narrative, into symbolic abstraction, those remain out of reach. Why is the gulf so vast? Why do so many creatures come close to the threshold of language but never cross it? Dolphins name one another, whales compose songs, birds learn dialects, primates sign and gesture, but only humans speak in full grammar. Only humans tell stories. Only humans create myths. Some suggest the answer lies in symbolism. Other animals communicate the immediate. Food here, danger there, mate now, child lost. Their signals are tied to the present, to survival. Humans alone step beyond the immediate, using sounds to stand for things not present at all. We name stars, gods, dreams, numbers. We use words not just to point at the world, but to reshape it. In that leap from signal to symbol lies the heart of the difference. And yet, the question remains, why us? Why should symbolism flourish only in humans, when intelligence and communication are scattered across so many species? Why does no other animal, however gifted, cross fully into the realm of language? Evolutionary explanations suggest it was a confluence of factors, brain size, social complexity, genetic shifts like FOXP2, and the anatomy of the vocal tract. Perhaps other animals never crossed the threshold because the pieces never aligned. But some find this answer unsatisfying. If evolution tinkers endlessly, why should no other lineage stumble into the same constellation of traits? Why should the gulf remain absolute? This is where speculation, once again, whispers. Perhaps the reason no other species speaks as we do is because language was never entirely an evolutionary inevitability. Perhaps it was given, deliberately or otherwise, to us alone. If so, the gulf exists not because others could not cross it, but because the path was never theirs to take. Imagine, for a moment, the perspective of a teacher species, whether terrestrial or from beyond. To them, dolphins and whales might be brilliant, birds charming, primates promising. Yet if they sought a vessel for symbolic language, they may have chosen only one lineage. They may have implanted the gift where it could take root most effectively in us. And so, while the forests and oceans still hum with communication, only humans carry the code of syntax, the blueprint of universal grammar. The gulf, then, may not be an accident. It may be a boundary drawn by design. Of course, we cannot know. Perhaps dolphins are having conversations deeper than we imagine, their meaning hidden in frequencies we barely detect. Perhaps whale songs carry more symbolism than we yet understand. Perhaps the gulf is not as wide as we think, only our tools too crude to bridge it. Science continues to probe, to listen, to compare. And yet, so far, the pattern holds. Humans alone stand in the symbolic world, and that fact remains one of the greatest puzzles of all. It leaves us with a haunting possibility. If the voices of other creatures are like music, beautiful but bounded, then our voices are like code, open-ended, infinite. Why? Was it chance, or was it gift? Tonight, as you drift into thought, you might imagine the chorus of the world around you. Dolphins clicking in the deep, whales singing across oceans, birds repeating their morning songs, apes calling in forests. And then, woven among them, the human voice, strange, symbolic, infinite, alone, and yet connected. A solitary language among many, carrying mysteries we have only begun to understand. If our voices are the only ones that carry full symbolic power, then the question presses even harder. Where did it come from? Did our ancestors stumble into this ability by chance, or could they have borrowed it, received it from another intelligence? The idea of ancestral borrowing suggests that language may not have been an invention at all, but an inheritance. That the code of speech, the grammar of thought, was not discovered by humans, but taught to us, seeded into us like fire placed into waiting hands. We can see echoes of this idea in the myths we have already explored. Culture bringers like Quetzalcoatl and Oannes, Hermes and Thoth, were remembered not as inventors of language but as teachers. They did not struggle and fail until words emerged. They descended with knowledge ready-made, passing it to humanity. And if myths preserve even fragments of truth, perhaps they are remembering encounters with beings whose symbolic systems were already ancient when we first spoke. Imagine, for a moment, an early human clan gathered around their fire. Their world is bound to gesture, to cries, to the immediacy of the hunt and the danger of the dark. Then one night, strangers arrive, whether flesh and blood or visions from elsewhere, we cannot say. They do not threaten, they teach. They show how sounds can be shaped into symbols, how gestures can become signs, how meaning can be made portable. At first it seems like magic. Then it becomes natural. Within a few generations, the gift is no longer a memory of strangers, it is the fabric of thought itself. If this happened, the traces would be faint. No artifacts would remain, no monuments of stone. The only legacy would be the structure of our speech, the universality of grammar, the suddenness of language's rise. And that is exactly what we see. A gulf between us and other species, a code written into us that appears all at once in the record of history. Borrowing need not mean dependence. When Prometheus gave fire to mortals in Greek myth, it was not the fire itself that mattered most, but what humans did with it afterward. They tended it, expanded it, built upon it. Perhaps language is the same. If it was given, even in seed form, our ancestors nurtured it into thousands of tongues, into epics and scriptures, into lore and song. The gift became ours. The inheritance became indistinguishable from invention. But what kind of intelligence could have given such a thing? Was it another species of human, older and wiser, now extinct? The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, the shadowy cousins whose bones we have only begun to uncover, did they possess symbolic systems that we absorbed, carrying their voices forward even as their bodies vanished? Or was it something stranger still, something from beyond our lineage entirely? Some researchers speculate that hominins may have exchanged knowledge through encounters we do not yet understand. Archaeological sites show surprising bursts of sophistication, sudden leaps in tool-making, art, and culture. Could language have been part of this exchange, carried from one branch of humanity to another until it rooted in us? Others allow their imagination to drift further. If intelligence beyond Earth exists, it may not have left us machines or monuments. But what if it left us words or the framework for them? What if language is not only the mark of humanity, but the trace of a far older design, borrowed by our ancestors in a moment we no longer remember? It is a haunting possibility that every story we tell, every poem we write, every conversation whispered in the dark, is part of a legacy not of our own making. That language is not invention but inheritance, not discovery but remembrance. Of course, science demands evidence, and here evidence falters. There are no inscriptions proving that language was taught, no fossils carrying the syntax of speech, and yet the patterns remain strange. The suddenness of the great leap forward, the universality of grammar across cultures, the myths that speak of language as gift, the silence of other species. Put together, they leave a shape that can be read as coincidence or as memory. If our ancestors borrowed language, then perhaps that explains why it feels so much larger than us. Why words arrive unbidden in the mind, why poets speak of inspiration as if from elsewhere, why mystics claim their hymns are dictated by unseen voices. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps every act of speaking is an act of remembering, of channeling something given long before. Think of it this way. When you speak, you are not only using your own voice, you are also using the voices of every generation before you. Every syllable carries echoes of mothers and fathers, tribes and nations, cultures long gone. If language was borrowed from another intelligence, then the chain stretches back even further to a moment of encounter, when silence broke and words entered the human story. That inheritance is still unfolding. We pass it to children, who pass it to theirs, who will pass it to others. The words change, the sounds shift, the scripts evolve, but the gift remains the same. A code alive within us, older than memory, flowing forward through time. And perhaps that is why language feels both intimate and alien. It belongs to us, yet it exceeds us. It arises from our mouths, yet it feels as though it comes from somewhere else. It is not invention, but inheritance. Not discovery, but legacy. Tonight, as you hear these words, you are participating in that legacy. You are borrowing again, just as our ancestors may have borrowed long ago. And in that act, you are connected to them, to one another, and perhaps to something older still, waiting just beyond the edges of memory. If language is inheritance, if it flows through us as a legacy borrowed from long ago, then it is not only our voices that have been shaped by it, but our minds themselves. For language is not just a tool we use, it is a lens through which we see the world. Without it, our very consciousness might not be the same. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, often summarized as linguistic relativity, suggests that the language we speak influences, even structures, the way we think. To speak is not merely to describe reality, but to filter it. Different languages emphasize different aspects of the world, and those emphases shape the awareness of their speakers. Consider, for instance, languages that use absolute directions rather than relative ones. In some indigenous tongues of Australia, people do not say left or right. They say north or south, east or west. A speaker of such a language must always know their orientation, even indoors or at night. Studies have shown that speakers of these languages indeed maintain a far sharper sense of direction than those who rely on relative terms. Their consciousness is attuned differently, their awareness calibrated by their words. Or think of languages with many terms for colors. Russian, for example, divides light blue and dark blue into distinct categories, while English uses the single word blue. Experiments show that Russian speakers can distinguish shades more quickly than English speakers. Their perception is sharpened by their vocabulary. In this way, language reaches even into the eye, bending perception itself. The implications are vast. If language shapes perception, then different tongues carry different modes of consciousness. To learn a new language is not only to memorize new words, but to step into a new way of thinking. Each grammar, each lexicon, is a mirror that reflects the world in its own unique pattern. But this raises a deeper question still. Did speech itself expand consciousness? Could it be that before words, human thought was narrower, less reflective, less able to loop back upon itself? Without language, what would the mind be? Images, sensations, emotions, yes. But could those be organized into the elaborate structures we now call thought? Could we imagine futures, recall the past in detail, create myths, laws, philosophies? Or would life be lived only in the immediacy of the moment, with no ability to stand outside experience and reflect upon it? Some researchers argue that it was precisely the arrival of language that expanded the boundaries of human consciousness. Words allowed us to label the world, and in labeling, to separate ourselves from it. A rock became not only a rock, but rock, a category, a concept. Fire became not only flame, but fire, something that could be spoken of when absent, something that could be remembered, planned for, revered. The word allowed distance, and with distance came reflection. Think of a child learning to speak. At first, their world is sensations, warmth, hunger, light, touch. Slowly, they learn words, and their awareness changes. Dog, tree, water. With each word, the world becomes more organized, more structured, more thinkable. Then come abstract words, good, bad, love, fear, and with them, the child's inner life blooms. Could the human species itself have undergone a similar transformation, its consciousness expanding as its vocabulary grew? The philosopher Wittgenstein once wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." If he was right, then language is not only a tool of communication but the very boundary of consciousness. To give humans speech may have been to give them the ability to think as we now do. Without it, perhaps our ancestors were intelligent but not reflective, aware but not self-aware, clever but not conscious in the way we are. And so we are left with a haunting possibility. Consciousness, as we experience it, may not have been inevitable. It may have been sparked, expanded, unlocked by words. In this sense, language is not just sound, not just symbol. It is the fire of the mind, the very architecture of awareness. But if that is true, another question emerges. If our ancestors borrowed language from another intelligence, did they also borrow consciousness? was our inner world, our reflective awareness, itself an inheritance. Did we not only learn to speak, but learn to be human from voices not our own? Speculation stirs here. To implant language in a species would not only alter its communication, it would alter its consciousness. It would create beings who not only survive, but dream, who not only feel, but know they are feeling, who not only act, but reflect on action. Such a transformation would be profound, perhaps even dangerous. For with awareness comes the burden of choice, the knowledge of mortality, the creation of myth and memory. And yet, it is exactly this transformation that made us who we are. Our consciousness, the inner stage upon which all thought unfolds, is inseparable from the words that run across it. To give language is to give a mirror. And in that mirror, we see not only the world, but ourselves. Without words, would you be aware of yourself as I? Would you distinguish past from future, hope from memory? Or would life flow like a stream, unbroken but unexamined? This is the question that lingers in the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and beyond. That language did not merely shape our thoughts, it created the space in which thought could exist as we know it. So tonight, as you listen, consider the words flowing through your mind. They are not only sounds, they are the very fabric of consciousness. They shape what you can imagine, what you can recall, what you can dream. Without them, your awareness would be something entirely different, something perhaps simpler, quieter, but also less vast. Language gave us more than communication. It gave us ourselves. If language gave us ourselves, then we must ask the next, more daring question. Was that self entirely our own to begin with? Or did the arrival of language carry with it something even greater, a spark that reshaped the very structure of our minds? Speculation suggests that consciousness itself may have been imported, that in receiving language, our ancestors did not simply gain the ability to name and describe the world, but to see themselves as beings apart from it. Self-awareness, reflection, memory, woven into narrative, these are not guaranteed features of intelligence. They may have been gifts, inseparable from the words that made them possible. Imagine early hominins before speech. Their days were lived in sensation, hunger, warmth, fear, touch. Their awareness may have been immediate, bound to the present. A leopard in the grass meant danger. A flame in the cave meant safety. They could plan and act, yes, but perhaps without the inner dialogue we now take for granted. Perhaps without the I that narrates life from within. Now imagine the moment when words arrived. Suddenly, thoughts could be named. Memories could be recalled not just as images but as sentences. I saw the leopard by the river. Tomorrow, I will not go there. The mind began to loop back upon itself, to recognize its own awareness. From speech came not only communication, but introspection. The fire of consciousness flared. This possibility that language did not merely accompany consciousness but created, it leads to an even stranger thought. If words were given to us, then perhaps so was consciousness. Our ability to think of ourselves as selves, to stand apart from the world in thought, may not have been the inevitable flowering of evolution, but the deliberate result of an external spark. To give a species language is to give it the power of reflection. To give reflection is to give identity, and to give identity is to alter the very nature of existence. If our consciousness is tied to language, and if language was borrowed or bestowed, then perhaps even the voice inside your head, the one speaking as you listen now, is not wholly human in origin. Philosophers have long wrestled with the mystery of awareness. What does it mean to be conscious? To feel not only sensation, but the knowledge of sensation, to not only see, but to know that you are seeing. Science can map brain activity, trace neurons firing, identify the networks involved. But the experience of being the first-person reality of self remains elusive. It is what some call the hard problem of consciousness. If this problem resists explanation, could it be because consciousness is not entirely ours? Could it be that it was altered, uplifted, imported when language entered our species? That what we call human awareness is not wholly natural, but a fusion, our biology intertwined with a spark from somewhere else? Think of the myths again: the god who gives speech, the serpent who teaches writing, the fish-clad being who rises from the sea. In many of these stories, the gift is not only practical but transformative. Humanity changes after the encounter. They become something new. Perhaps these myths are memories of more than words. Perhaps they are memories of the moment when consciousness itself was expanded, when the light inside the mind grew brighter because of a gift we did not fashion alone. Speculation reaches further still. If consciousness was imported, then it may not be unique to us. The spark we carry might be shared across the cosmos, planted wherever conditions are right, wherever minds are ready. Perhaps our awareness is a thread in a far larger tapestry, one woven by intelligences older than stars, one in which language is the bridge between species, between minds. And what of the voice you hear inside yourself when you think? The silent narration, the inner dialogue that strings your life into story. Where does it come from? If language shaped consciousness, then even that inner voice may be an echo of the original gift, a continuation of the spark first ignited in our ancestors. When you speak silently to yourself, perhaps you are not only speaking as a human, but as a participant in something older, something vast, something that has been unfolding long before humanity walked the earth. There is a haunting beauty in this possibility. If our consciousness was altered by gifted language, then we are not merely creatures of flesh and bone. We are carriers of intention, vessels of awareness shaped by forces beyond our own evolution. The I that speaks within you may be the most intimate evidence of an encounter humanity has long since forgotten. And yet, even without speculation, the link between language and consciousness is undeniable. Studies show that without words, our ability to structure thought collapses. Inner speech guides memory, decision-making, even self-control. When words are disrupted, so too is awareness. This suggests that our very sense of self is entangled with language. To strip it away would be to change what it means to be human. So, perhaps consciousness is not simply imported. Perhaps it is co-created, a fusion of biology and language, of neurons and symbols, of flesh and code. Perhaps we are hybrid beings, our bodies born of earth, our minds shaped by something older, something given. And if that is true, then to speak is to participate in the ancient act of becoming human. To use words is to renew the spark, to carry forward the legacy of an origin we cannot fully remember. Tonight, as you drift deeper into reflection, you might consider this: that your thoughts, the ones rising even now, may not be entirely yours. They may be part of a conversation that began long before you, a dialogue between species, between times, between worlds. Language gave us ourselves, but perhaps that self was never entirely our own. If our thoughts may not be entirely our own, then where else might voices arise? Perhaps not only from the past, not only from the hidden blueprint of language, but from somewhere deeper within dreams, within altered states, within the places where the conscious mind loosens its grip and something stranger begins to speak. Throughout history, there have been countless accounts of people uttering words in tongues they had never learned. Some call it glossolalia, or speaking in tongues. In religious traditions, it is often described as a form of divine communication, a sacred outpouring, words flowing not from the speaker but through them. To outsiders, the sounds seem like nonsense, syllables strung together without meaning. And yet to those within the experience, it feels profound, alive, as though another language is rising unbidden from the depths of the soul. But glossolalia is not the only mystery. There are stories of dream languages, individuals who, while asleep, speak fluently in words unknown to them when awake. Parents have reported children muttering in their sleep with accents they never heard, reciting patterns of sound that bear the rhythm of real speech, though no one can trace the origin. For those who witness it, there is something uncanny in these moments, as if the dreamer has tapped into a tongue older than memory, surfacing for a moment before dissolving with waking. Then there is the phenomenon of automatic writing. In trance states, some claim their hands move without conscious control, inscribing words, symbols, even entire passages in languages they do not consciously know. Sometimes the words are recognizable: Latin, Greek, archaic dialects. Sometimes they are not, appearing instead as unknown scripts, shapes that feel like writing but defy interpretation. To skeptics, these are coincidences, the unconscious mind producing patterns. To others, they are transmissions, echoes of hidden knowledge surfacing through the body. Together, these phenomena point to something unsettling: the existence of inner tongues, languages that rise from within, unbidden, outside the conscious will. Where do they come from? Are they inventions of the mind, fragments of memory recombined into illusion? Or could they be something older, forgotten voices resurfacing, remnants of the first tongue whispering through us still? Consider the way dreams themselves often feel like languages without translation. Symbols appear, events unfold in ways that carry meaning beyond logic. A figure appears, a word repeats, an image lingers with weight impossible to explain. Some psychologists, following Freud, see this as the unconscious speaking in symbols. Others, following Jung, suggest it may be the collective unconscious, a reservoir of archetypes shared across humanity. If so, then perhaps dream languages are not nonsense at all, but fragments of something collective, something ancient. What if the first language, the proto-world tongue, still lives in us, not in our waking speech, but in the depths of dream and trance? What if glossolalia, dream languages, and automatic writing are not inventions, but echoes? Echoes of the seed tongue planted long ago, surfacing in moments when consciousness loosens and memory reaches further back than history. The thought is haunting. It suggests that our inner lives are threaded with languages we do not know we know, that within each of us lies a hidden lexicon, a ghostly vocabulary waiting to be spoken. Perhaps this is why glossolalia feels sacred, why dream languages feel uncanny, why automatic writing feels charged with significance. We recognize, on some level, that the sounds are not random. They are memories, not of our own lives, but of humanity itself. Consider also the reports of people under the influence of near-death experiences or altered states of consciousness. Some describe hearing voices, not in any familiar tongue, but in a language that feels instantly comprehensible, while the experience lasts only to dissolve into unintelligibility upon return. Others report visions of inscriptions, glowing words in unknown scripts, carrying meaning too vast to be put into ordinary speech. These accounts, scattered across cultures, suggest that when the ordinary mind dissolves, another form of language waits beyond the threshold. Science has attempted explanations. Neurologists argue that glossolalia arises from altered brain states, bypassing the usual language centers. Psychologists suggest dream languages are the mind's way of simulating speech, drawing on fragments of memory and sound. Linguists note that glossolalic utterances mimic the phonetic structure of real languages, even if they lack consistent grammar. These explanations may be true, but they do not erase the strangeness. They do not explain why the experiences feel so profound, why they resonate across cultures, why so many describe them as encounters with something other. And so, speculation whispers again. If language was given to us, then perhaps it left residues, layers within the psyche that surface when ordinary speech falls away. The inner tongues may be the buried roots of that gift, surfacing in trance, dream, and vision. They may be the voices of the blueprint itself, reminders that our words are not entirely ours, that deeper codes remain dormant, waiting. Imagine for a moment that glossolalia is not random, but the proto-world tongue resurfacing, stripped of grammar but alive in rhythm. Imagine that dream languages are memories of a time when humanity spoke with one voice, echoing in sleep as if the unconscious still remembers. Imagine that automatic writing is not invention but remembrance, hands inscribing patterns carried forward from forgotten teachers. Whether true or not, the possibility gives weight to the mystery of inner tongues. They remind us that language is not only external, not only the speech we share in daylight. It is also internal, flowing in dreams, surfacing in moments when control loosens. Perhaps the oldest language of all is not entirely lost, it may be hidden, whispering in our sleep, woven into the silence of our thoughts. And so we must ask, if these forgotten tongues are echoes, what are they trying to say? If forgotten tongues rise in dreams, then perhaps what they are trying to say is older than memory itself. For within the dream world, language does not appear as ordinary speech alone. It manifests as symbols, recurring images, archetypes that span cultures and eras. To the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, these were not random phantoms of the mind, but signposts of something deeper, the collective unconscious, a reservoir of shared human experience that exists beneath individual awareness. Jung noticed that across the world, from Europe to Asia to the Americas, people dreamed of the same figures: the mother, the shadow, the wise old man, the trickster, the hero. Myths, separated by oceans, repeated the same patterns. Dreams spoke in the same symbolic vocabulary. It was as though humanity carried within it a hidden storehouse of meaning, an inner language older than any spoken tongue. Consider the serpent. In one culture, it is temptation; in another, wisdom; in another, still, renewal and rebirth. Yet always the serpent returns, coiling through myths, dreams, and visions. Or the mother archetype appearing in countless forms as goddess, earth, nurturer, creator. These are not borrowed across cultures, they arise independently. They are echoes, they are reminders. Jung believed these archetypes were the shared inheritance of the human psyche, shaped by evolution, encoded in our minds as deeply as instincts. But what if they are something more? What if they are fragments of a lost language, a symbolic tongue spoken not in sound but in image, remembered by the unconscious long after its words have faded? Dreams, then, may be more than private theatre. They may be a form of remembrance. When we dream, we speak in a language of archetypes, bridges of meaning that connect us not only to our own lives, but to the lives of all who came before. The recurring figures, the symbols that resonate across continents, may be remnants of the first language humanity ever knew. A language not of words but of shapes, rhythms, and patterns. A language seeded so deeply that even when the surface tongues have changed 1,000 times, the root symbols remain. Speculation deepens here. Could the collective unconscious be not only psychological but historical? Could it carry within it the faint echoes of a real language, the proto-world tongue remembered not by conscious minds but by dreams? If so, then every dream is a fragment of translation, every archetype a fossilized word, every recurring image a syllable of the first speech. Think of how children learn to speak. Before words, they gesture, they imitate, they draw meaning from rhythm and tone. Language begins in symbols before it settles into syntax. Perhaps humanity's first tongue was the same, a symbolic language of images, later translated into sounds, and perhaps in dreams, we still speak it. The idea is not without precedent. Many cultures describe dreams as a form of communication from elsewhere, messages from ancestors, whispers from gods, visions from spirits. In such traditions, dreams are not illusions but conversations. They are taken seriously because they are seen as remembered voices, not inventions of the sleeper. In that sense, Jung's archetypes may be not only universal psychological structures, but fragments of a lost dialogue with the original language of humanity. Take the archetype of the journey, the hero who departs, faces trials, returns, transformed. This story repeats endlessly across Gilgamesh, Odysseus, Buddha, Christ, and countless others. Why? Perhaps because it is the grammar of existence itself, carried from the beginning. The structure of myth may be the structure of the lost language, surviving not in words but in story forms that echo through the unconscious. And then there is the dream phenomenon of unknown but understood languages. Some dreamers report hearing speech in dreams that they do not recognize, yet somehow comprehend while dreaming. Upon waking, the words dissolve, leaving only the sense of meaning. What if this is not invention, but memory, our unconscious speaking in the archetypal tongue, the first language, the one we no longer know consciously but still carry within? If so, then the collective unconscious is more than psychology. It is an archive. An archive not of artifacts, but of symbols and patterns, remnants of a lost communication system, perhaps gifted long ago, now fossilized within us. This transforms the question. When we speak in dreams, when we write in trance, when we see archetypes repeat across myths, we may not be creating. We may be remembering. We may be translating fragments of the lost language into forms our conscious minds can handle. And what would this mean for our sense of self? If dreams are not merely personal but collective, if the archetypes are not inventions but inheritances, then part of our inner life is not ours alone. Part of it belongs to the species. Part of it may even belong to those who gave us language in the first place. Our unconscious may be not only a shadow of biology but a bridge to an older design. So, the next time you dream of falling, of flying, of being pursued, of encountering figures you do not know yet recognize, consider that you may be hearing echoes. Echoes of a tongue spoken before time, remembered not in waking speech but in the hidden grammar of the unconscious. A language without words, yet one that continues to shape the deepest patterns of our minds. Perhaps the lost language was never fully lost. Perhaps it lives still, in every dream you dream, in every myth retold, in every archetype that stirs recognition across cultures. Perhaps we do not invent these things. Perhaps we remember them. If the lost language lingers in dreams and symbols, then we must ask where it might be found in the waking world. And here we turn to stone, to the earliest marks left by human hands, the first attempts to fix meaning in matter, to preserve thought beyond the fleeting moment of sound. These carvings, paintings, and inscriptions are the archaeology of the word, fossils, not of bones, but of stories. Long before writing systems blossomed in Mesopotamia or Egypt, humans painted caves. In Lascaux and Chauvet in France, in Altamira in Spain, in Sulawesi in Indonesia, images of animals stretch across stone walls. Bison in motion, horses mid-gallop, mammoths traced with charcoal. At first, they may seem like art alone, depictions of the hunt or the sacred. But many scholars believe they are more than images. They are symbols, tied to myths we can no longer hear, echoes of spoken words now lost. Imagine the flickering firelight against those cave walls, the shadows dancing as a storyteller pointed at the painted bison and spoke of its spirit, its power, its role in the cycle of life. The painting was not only an image, it was a mnemonic, a marker, a fossilized trace of a story once told aloud. What survives is the image, but embedded within it is the ghost of a sentence, the echo of a myth fossilized in stone. Later came the petroglyphs, carved into rock faces across deserts and cliffs. Spirals, circles, figures with outstretched arms, animals, stars. They appear on every continent, thousands of years apart, yet strangely similar in form. Were they maps, calendars, ritual signs? Or were they fragments of a universal symbolic system shared by early humanity before the tongues diverged? Whatever they were, they remain as the first inscriptions' attempts to preserve meaning not in memory, but in matter. In time, these marks became more deliberate. Across Mesopotamia, cylinder seals carried images and symbols pressed into clay, signatures of identity and authority. In Egypt, sacred carvings adorned temples and tombs, not only to honor the dead but to preserve the words spoken about them. In China, oracle bones recorded questions to ancestors and gods, scratched into shell and bone before being cracked by fire. Each of these marks is more than communication. Each is a fossilized fragment of speech, a spoken myth turned into permanence. There is something haunting about this transformation. Words are air, gone as soon as they are spoken. Yet humans, almost instinctively, sought to capture them. We painted, we carved, we inscribed not only to preserve, but to bridge the gap between sound and silence. These first inscriptions are traces of voices that would otherwise be lost. And yet, they are not full writing. They are symbols, images, proto-scripts. They point toward meaning, but they do not capture it completely. They are halfway between speech and writing, reminders of the transition when humanity first began to fossilize its myths in matter. What do these symbols say? We cannot know. The stories that accompanied them are gone, dissolved into the silence of millennia. But we can sense their gravity. A spiral carved into rock was not idle decoration. It meant something. To those who carved it, it was a word, or a prayer, or a memory. The meaning is lost to us, but its presence remains, a ghost of speech etched into stone. Here, again, speculation lingers. Could these early carvings be remnants of a symbolic system not entirely human in origin? If language was a gift, perhaps the impulse to carve and paint was part of the gift as well. The urge to preserve, to make permanent, to fix meaning outside the fragile vessel of memory. Perhaps the first rock art was not invention but continuation, a way of echoing lessons given by culture bringers long ago. Consider also the similarity of symbols across the world. Spirals, hands, circles, grids appearing in Europe, the Americas, Africa, Asia, Oceania. How can such patterns emerge everywhere, across vast distances and ages? Some explain this as coincidence, the product of universal human psychology. But another possibility is that these were fragments of a shared symbolic heritage, carried by migrating peoples from an original source, itself a remnant of something older still. If so, then the archaeology of the word is more than human art. It is the residue of an ancient communication system, fossilized in stone. The paintings, carvings, and inscriptions are not only attempts to express, but attempts to remember. Think of it this way. Every mark in those caves is a word that once had a voice. Every petroglyph was once explained, pointed to, spoken of. Every sacred carving was accompanied by a chant, a prayer, a ritual phrase. We cannot hear those voices now, but the stones remember. They hold the shadow of the words, even if the sound is gone. This is why standing before ancient rock art feels uncanny. You are not only looking at an image, you are looking at the absence of a voice, the ghost of a story no one can tell anymore. The silence presses in, but the marks insist. Someone once spoke here. Someone once gave these images meaning. And in that silence, we can let our imagination drift. Perhaps the words were in the proto-world tongue. Perhaps they were echoes of a teacher species, remembered in myth, forgotten in history, but preserved in symbol. Perhaps every spiral, every animal traced in ochre, is part of a greater inscription, a fossil record not only of art, but of the first words humanity ever spoke. The archaeology of the word is not only about discovering how humans learned to write, it is about discovering how humans tried not to forget. Every mark on stone is an act of defiance against silence, a refusal to let speech vanish. And in that defiance, we may glimpse the faint outlines of the gift itself, the transformation of sound into memory, of story into symbol, of myth into permanence. So much of what we have explored tonight drifts between mystery and memory. Language stands before us as a tool, yes, a means of survival, of coordination, of knowledge shared across time, but it also feels like more. It feels like a gift, something that came to us suddenly, fully formed, carried not only in sound but in our very biology. And it feels like an inheritance, passed down not only through families and cultures, but perhaps from an origin far beyond the horizon of human history. The central question remains unanswered, and perhaps it always will. Did we invent words, shaping them out of silence with nothing but our own ingenuity? Or are we only the latest speakers of a much older tongue, voices in a chain that stretches back not thousands but uncountable years, linked to minds we no longer remember? Whatever the truth, language is what makes us human. It is the bridge between thought and world, between one person and another, between the living and the dead. And whether we created it, received it, or borrowed it, every word we speak carries with it an echo that reminds us of origins we cannot quite see. As you drift toward sleep, imagine those echoes surrounding you. Voices etched on cave walls, voices whispered in dreams, voices rising from forgotten scripts and forbidden names. Voices carried not only through time, but through the silence of space, as though words themselves are eternal, waiting for listeners. And in that vision, one thought lingers. Perhaps every word you speak has been spoken before, in caves, in temples, in stars. Perhaps we are never the first to say anything at all. We are only remembering, we are only repeating, we are only continuing a conversation as old as the universe.